Chapter 13. Scene 1. The Great Demonstration. Bethany and Naomi left for school, still traumatized by Mrs. Sanderson's lecture on abortion and the evil United States government. Naomi had no reservations about that truth. Those people could do it. They were that evil. They were godless. Bethany's reservations were founded on her belief in the inherent goodness of people. If the people were good, would they create and support an evil government? If Mrs. Sanderson had not told the truth about other events, what else was not true? I hope you remember the second pivotal event. Rob Bridgman, the Lord's chosen man, was again denied his rightful victory. His opponent, John Landers, a non-Christian, lost by 8 million votes but was declared the victor. There had been widespread fraud. The outcry came from 70% of the population. Bethany thought, that much of the country? Then how did he lose? Bolstered by rage over the stolen second election, people began to refuse to obey the United States government. Over the next 5 years, the Christian communities repeatedly resisted the United States system of justice. The laws were unjust, so they disobeyed. Mrs. Sanderson surrounded the United States system of justice with 2 flexing fingers of each hand. Essentially, the government denied the Christian communities self-determination and self-rule. All we wanted was to live our own lives our own way. Christians, especially evangelical Christians, argued that the courts of the United States had no right to impose their morals and accept their immorality. We were doing no harm to anyone. We were simply preventing evil, immoral people from polluting our community. Still, they were telling us that we had to accept the desires and beliefs of immoral people and the evil they brought. For instance, God does not want men to lie with men or women to lie with women. If God had a person born as man, he is a man forever. A woman born as a woman is to remain a woman. Men are to dress as men, and women are to dress as women. We are all as we are born, unchanging. Men have their roles, and women have theirs. That is the way of the Lord. As if Mrs. Sanderson were deep into an intense argument defending her fervent beliefs, her nostrils flared, and her eyes blazed. We were merely protecting our Christian people, especially our innocent children, from the dark and depraved, godless element which would poison our society. They had poisoned their own society, but would not be content until they poisoned ours. We had to protect ourselves as Christians have had to do throughout history. We were not going to be persecuted and punished for our beliefs and for following the word of our Lord. Bethany scanned the room. The class was leaning forward, inheriting Mrs. Sanderson's inflamed countenance. Bethany took a long look at Naomi. She had joined them. Bethany had never seen her friends, and especially Naomi, like this. What is going on here? Is this inspiration and determination or indoctrination and hate? Nearly panting, Mrs. Sanderson paused. She took a deep breath, calmed, and continued. For several more years, this continued. In the 7th year, a third pivotal event occurred that would later bring about an event called the Great Demonstration. Following, it was another event later named the Great Conflagration. You might have heard them referred together as the Great Demonstration and Conflagration. You've learned only the basic history of them. That was done to protect you from the details of violence and the despicable act that instigated the events. We have waited until you were old enough to hear it and understand it. Now is the time. Momentarily, her eyes dropped. With a somber tone, she continued. The Great Demonstration took place on July 23, 2030, when United States federal judge ruled that the Landers Crossroads Mayor Jesse Maddox and the 10-member council could not use federal tax funds mingled with their own tax funds to expand the church in their own town, Landers Crossroads, which was in what we now call the Holy Bastion territory. Since the people of the town had paid taxes to the United States government, they felt it was their money to spend as they wished. Thus, the mayor and council continued to spend the money for that purpose anyway. The government appointed a comptroller and sent her and a staff of 5, 2 women and 3 men, to assume command of the town. They were scheduled to arrive in about 2 weeks, and the town was to have everything prepared for them. Mrs. Sanderson walked to the end of the first row, turned left, and walked down the side. The girls' eyes stuck to her, turning their heads with each step. The town did prepare for their arrival. rather intrusion. Unknown to the invaders, they would become part of the great demonstration. At the last row, the girls had wrenched their necks just short of strain. They quickly turned back. Mrs. Sanderson turned around and walked back along the rows to the first desk. She stopped, scanning the class. Their eyes were still fastened to her. Hoping to arrive when the town was fast asleep, United States government officials drove into the outskirts of the center of town at midnight. Set out before them were some 500 townspeople, with more walking in from around the town. They had placed themselves in front of the community center, a low, sweeping, bland, gray concrete structure where the offices of the town officials were located. The crowd filled the community center's parking lot, a large park, a street that ran in front, and up a street that led to the community center. Mrs. Sanderson paused, then walked to the center of the front row. For dramatic effect, she made a quick turn to the class. The government cars came to a sudden stop, and a woman got out and began to walk the 25 yards to the crowd. She stopped 15 feet in front of the group. She asked to talk to Mayor Maddox. She was answered with silence. Twice more she asked. Still, only silence. In the middle of her next appeal, a disturbance in the crowd broke into her request. With the assistance of a silver-handled ebony cane, Jesse Maddox, the portly 50-year-old mayor, tapped his cane on the concrete and limped into the back of the crowd as the first section of demonstrators separated. He continued to move forward, splitting the crowd as he limped toward the front, grimacing the final several yards. He came to a stop 10 feet beyond the crowd, leaning his weight slightly against the cane. With her hands on her hips, the woman struck a pompous pose in front of Mayor Maddox, and acting as if the mayor should bow down before her, she told the mayor she was the government comptroller, Martha Iglesias. She said she had come here to take over the finances of Landers Crossroads. She faced the crowd, and with a giant sweeping left-to-right hand gesture, she demanded that Mayor Maddox order the demonstrators to disperse. She turned back to the mayor and arrogantly ordered him to take her and her staff to his office immediately. Mayor Maddox, sliding his hand down his cane, lowered himself as he winced in pain. Behind the mayor, one person after another joined his protest. Shocked by what she saw, Martha Iglesias took several steps back. She had no idea how she should react. People had almost always been compliant. Mrs. Sanderson paused to watch the girls' wide-eyed anticipation. Sitting in the front row, Helen's eyes were begging to know Mrs. Iglesias' reaction. Helen was one of those cute girls of small stature who brought out the protective instinct in the girls. So, it was a surprise when Helen burst out. What did she do? Mrs. Sanderson shifted her eyes to Helen and softened them, as if trying to avoid frightening her. Still looking at Helen, she said, "She threatened them." Still engrossed, Helen quickly asked, "How?" "What did she say?" "She told the mayor she would call the Justice Department and send the FBI and U.S. Marshals. She gave him 3 hours to comply, or she would make the call. The demonstrators were to leave, and she was to be led into the administrative building. She said the city would lose its government funding." The mayor rose and addressed the crowd, pleading with them to go home. It took 20 minutes, but slowly the people left. The mayor took the comptroller and her staff to the administration building. Iglesias told the mayor that he didn't need to stay. He said he would like to make sure that, if she needed help, he would be there. She responded that she didn't want him there. Mayor Maddox asked how long they would be staying. Iglesias said they would be here until they were certain that the town complied with the regulations completely. Maddox wanted to know if he and the other town's employees would be able to use the admin area to conduct their normal daily activities. She said until she was satisfied they would not. He wanted to know if her team would be sleeping in the administration building because there was nowhere for them to stay in the town. She said that would not be a problem because they would soon have trailers delivered. All she wanted was one of the secretaries to show them where the files were and to tell her what the passwords for the computers and Wi-Fi were. As the mayor was escorted to the full-length glass doors, he looked at the printing Landers Crossroads administration. Everything in Landers Crossroads was backwards now. Alexandra's hand rose quickly. Wi-Fi. It was that thing you told us about that connected computers to each other, the thing that doesn't exist anymore. Good memory, Alexandra. Why did they get rid of it? It was immoral. It displayed vulgar images and writings that lead people, especially children, to sinful ways. We'll discuss it some more another time. Yes, ma'am. Anyway, he cooperated with her. Needless to say, the town was very upset. Mayor Maddox called a town meeting which met in the church next to the community center. He let them vent for several minutes and then brought some order to the group. He told them not to resist for now. The sooner the government people felt they were in control, the sooner they would leave. Grudgingly, the townspeople agreed. Mrs. Sanderson walked behind her desk and stood behind her chair, placing her hands on the top of the back. The class wanted and expected her to continue. Instead, she said, "Go to your projects in the back of the room and continue working on them. I'll continue part 2 of the story called The Great Conflagration tomorrow." Reluctantly, the class went to the back of the room, uncovered their projects, and continued building their historical scene. Mrs. Sanderson smiled. She knew she had them in the palm of her hand. Scene 2. Great Conflagration. As I told you yesterday, today you will hear the story of the Great Conflagration, which began several months after the Great Demonstration. They were not directly connected, but they showed the disregard and disrespect the United States had for our rights and justice. The story of the Great Conflagration was kept a secret by the United States government, but through the diligent effort of some determined reporters, people discovered what happened on November 27, 2030. For several generations, the United States hid the events of that day. They wiped it from the history of Landers Crossroads, destroying all traces of the event. They said the Great Conflagration never happened, so it didn't. Since Landers Crossroads was a tiny town that almost no one had ever heard of, they got away with it. Now, as you remember, the government had control of the town, except for the police department. The people had gone about their daily lives, hoping the invaders would leave soon. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 5, then 2 months, and 3 months. The comptroller and her staff were still running the town after 4 months, and they had been making decisions about how the town spent its money. Early one morning on November 27th, 2030, a mother and father walked into their church pastor's office with their 13-year-old daughter. The daughter was clearly distraught, sobbing, and kept telling her mother she didn't want to talk to the pastor. Holding her daughter's hand tightly, the mother tugged her into his office with the father pushing her gently from behind. The young girl refused to talk to the pastor, and she pointedly told her mother not to. However, the mother revealed her daughter's harrowing experience. For several weeks after school, the daughter had been given a ride from the library in the community center by one of the comptroller's staff. The two had friendly conversations, and the staff member was very kind. But one day that all changed. When a young girl arrived home, she ran into the kitchen and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist and sobbed heavily. The mother hugged her and asked her what was wrong, but the daughter couldn't stop crying enough to tell her. After several minutes, the daughter sobbing lessened. Her mother again asked her what was wrong. The daughter didn't want to tell what had happened. She felt ashamed. Over the next several minutes, the mother told the pastor what happened, interspersed with bouts of tears from her and her daughter. Again, in dramatic fashion, Mrs. Sanderson paused. Sitting in the middle of the front row, Helen could no longer contain herself. She burst out, "What happened?" The class added their desires to hers. "All of you need to be patient. You'll find out." Anyway, to save the family more trauma, the pastor went with them to the police chief, Quincy Lavelle. Again, Mrs. Sanderson paused and emphasized the girl had been assaulted. Another pause. It was a woman, and it was sexual. The woman's name was Norma Harkness. The class gasped. In shocked disbelief, several girls loudly exclaimed, "A woman!" Expressions of disgust rolled like a wave across the room. The act was unthinkable, horrible. Then the revulsion exploded. The class pronounced that the woman and the people of the United States were godless sinners, beasts, evil, the devil incarnate, beyond redemption. After Chief Lavelle heard the story, he lurched up, rushed past the pastor, and stormed down the hall to the former mayor's section of the building, now occupied by the comptroller and her staff. Lavelle marched over to Norma Harkness' desk and told her to stand up. She did. He turned her around and handcuffed her hands behind her back as he told her what she was being arrested for, and then he read her rights to her. In the meantime, The ruckus had attracted not only the staff, but also the comptroller, who charged out of her office. She yelled at Chief Lavelle and demanded he stop, but he didn't. Norma Harkness was crying and resisting. Lavelle pulled her down the hall and into the jail and put her in a cell. As Mrs. Iglesias was following Harkness, she was denying she had done anything. The chief slammed the cell door, and as the massive clang filled the jail, he turned to Iglesias and waited for her ranting to stop. When she did, he told her what the charges were. She demanded Harkness be released. He refused. She demanded to know what the bail was. He said the judge would determine the bail, and the chief would transport her to Columbus to be arraigned within the next 3 days. She objected. The chief said it would take a few days to question her, get an attorney for her, and complete the paperwork for the transfer. Comptroller Iglesias was livid. She rushed back to her office. Expecting that there might be trouble from Comptroller Iglesias, Chief Lavelle and his only deputy, Stanley Gates, remained at the jail to ensure Norma Harkness remained in custody in a cell which was down the hall from the back conference room. Hours passed, each one raising the tension and then in time lowering it. The chief was resting in his chair with his feet propped on his desk. Stanley had followed the chief's example. The buzzer for the front door sounded, knocking the deputy's feet to the floor. A frown from the chief pushed Stanley out of the back room and to the door. The deputy looked through the peephole. He could see Comptroller Iglesias standing a few feet away. Stanley told the chief that Comptroller Iglesias was at the door with 2 U.S. Marshals standing behind her. The comptroller demanded to be let in. Hurrying from the back room, the chief came to the door. Iglesias again demanded that she be allowed to enter. The chief unlocked the door and backed up 10 feet. When Comptroller Iglesias and the marshal stepped past the threshold of the door, they were greeted by Chief Lavelle and Deputy Stanley, each holding a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun pointing in the intruders' faces, startling Iglesias, the marshal, and his deputies. They rapidly stepped away and stood rigid as statues. When Iglesias recovered, she strutted up to Chief Lavelle, demanding that Norma Harkness be turned over to her and the marshal. Chief Lavelle refused. Iglesias claimed the chief did not have sufficient evidence nor just cause to put Harkness in jail. Iglesias claimed since Harkness said she had done nothing wrong, that was enough for her. Lavelle moved to within 2 feet of Iglesias, glared down into her suddenly fearful eyes. She stepped back. He gave her details of the sexual assault. Iglesias recovered, regained her space, and refused to even consider it. Lavelle gave more graphic details. It made no difference. Then Iglesias accused the girl and the parents of fabricating the story. Iglesias said that the girl had instigated it. If the marshal decided to force his way in, Lavelle would be left with a choice: resist or relent. Mrs. Sanderson paused for effect. The next question from the girls was written on their faces. He relented. The class moaned. The chief was a good man. He could not kill them. He lived in a peaceful town. He had never killed nor shot, nor even aimed a gun at anyone. Rebecca, by nature an aggressive girl, growled. The chief should have killed them. Another barrage of agreeing fury shot through the class. Bethany got caught up in the outrage. Her usual placid composure had vanished. She was angrier than she had ever been. She clenched her fists tighter and tighter. Suddenly pain sprung open her hands. She placed them on her desk with her palms up. She gazed at them. She was shocked. She had dug her fingernails into her palm so deeply that they had left curved engravings of her nails. A drop of blood rose to the surface in the crevice of a nail's etching. She was horror-stricken by the intensity of her anger. She had felt hate growing in her, and it repulsed her. She had never thought herself to be that kind of person. Bethany's outrage quickly fell to the side. Violence had always struck her harshly and deeply. She had seen it as the worst of humankind. It made the world a tragically dark place. To her, that was where Satan dwelled. That was the source of his power. Shaken, Bethany looked at Naomi. She was as livid as the others. Was this her best friend, her compatriot? Was this the class of compassionate, kind Christians she had thought they were supposed to be? Would the Lord approve of such virulent anger and hate? Would this make the world a better place, a place of love where the Lord would be content to walk through? She folded her hands and listened attentively to the rumblings in the class and the intense rage of Mrs. Sanderson. For the first time, she saw how deeply damaged they all were. It was hard to fathom. She saw her world as a deep, darkening hole, with people flailing at the bottom, caught under the weight of their own hate and need for revenge. Her abdomen cramped, pushing a mass up her throat. She wished Mrs. Sanderson would stop. She didn't. Bethany rose from her seat, turned, put her hand over her mouth. The vomit flowed between her fingers and ran down the front of her dress. Mrs. Sanderson abruptly stopped and gasped. "Oh, Lord!" Bethany fell to her knees. Naomi was by her side immediately, holding her, ignoring the mess. The girls in the immediate area pushed themselves away. Mrs. Sanderson rushed to her. "Naomi, take Bethany to the health office and have the nurse call your mother." Naomi helped Bethany to her feet. "Take care of her, Naomi." "I will," she answered as she steadied Bethany. The distress of the lecture still lingered as they walked into the health office. The taste remained on Bethany's tongue, the smell in her nostrils. Her thoughts muddled into a swirling mass that was again rising up her throat. She sat in a chair and waited, fighting to keep down the sickness. She failed. Scene 3. Bed rest. When Bethany's mother walked into the health office, Bethany and Naomi were sitting in the outer office chairs, white, chrome, and uncomfortable. Bethany was leaning forward with her head down, her elbows on her knees, and a plastic bag fastened to a round ring large enough to cover her mouth and nose. Bethany held the handle, tightly grasping the handle as if it might fly away. Naomi was sitting close to her, holding her hair out of the way. A frown of concern covered her mother's face. "Oh, my poor sweet dear." Naomi looked up. "She's been really sick. Mrs. Winston, the health lady, says she's okay, but I'm worried." Their mother knelt down and looked under Bethany's lowered head. Bethany raised her head. Mummy, I don't feel so well. You don't look so well. I'm sorry." "Don't be silly. You don't need to apologize. You got sick, but I didn't have to get sick." "Bethany, that's not the way it works. I think I made myself sick." "Ow!" "Thinking things. Getting frightened." "What were you frightened about?" "Everybody in was so angry. Then I got angry too. Then I got scared. I didn't like it. It made my stomach hurt. Then I got sick. I ruined my dress. I'm sorry. Don't worry about that." "Naomi," Bethany's stomach cramped and again the sickness came. Her mother put her hand on Bethany's forehead to keep it steady. As the event subsided, Mrs. Colin rose. "I'm going to talk to the Mrs. Winston." She walked into the inner office. "I'm so sorry you're sick," Naomi said. "I wish I could help." "Naomi, when you go back to class, tell Mrs. Sanderson that I'm sorry. I'm not leaving you until you're well. You're a sweet sister. I love you. I love you too." Mrs. Colin came out of the inner office. "I've talked to Mrs. Winston, and she's sure you'll be fine, but I'm going to take you to the doctor anyway." "I want to go with you," Naomi said. "Of course. All for one and one for all," her mother said. "What?" Naomi asked. "The Three Musketeers. Just think of it as three people who stick together through the good and bad times. I'll tell you the story later." She never did. Scene 4. Check on Bethany. Bethany's interruption of Mrs. Sanderson's lecture caused concern for less than 5 minutes. Sanderson resumed the story of the Great Conflagration with the same vigor. Not only did the marshals get a writ to release Miss Harkness from Chief Lavell's custody, she was back at work as Mrs. Iglesias' assistant after a mere 2 days. Of course, the community was furious, and Mayor Jesse Maddox, who had been removed from his position, called a meeting of the disbanded 10-member city council. They decided to give Iglesias another opportunity to do the right thing. A committee of 3 and the mayor went to Iglesias to request a conference. When they arrived at the administration building, 2 marshals were guarding the door. The guards refused them entry until they received permission from Iglesias. She said that under no circumstances would they be allowed entry. The committee was still raging when they returned to the council. They conferred for several hours and arrived at a strategy. First, they would contact Iglesias' boss and ask him to redress their complaint. He said he was aware of the issue, and he supported Iglesias' decision. Was that the end of it? An outraged Helen blurted out. No, that wasn't. After a moonless, cloudy night, as the sun rose up from behind the community center, the light progressively revealed a sight that caused the marshal sentries to back up and retreat into the administration area. Spread out in front of the center, several thousand residents of the town and the surrounding area stood shoulder to shoulder. They were determined to see justice done, and no government official was going to deter them. Mayor Maddox limped up to the door, knocked on it with his cane, and waited. Minutes passed, and only the marshals were in sight, and they were standing well away from the door. Mayor Maddox waved the marshals forward. He asked if Iglesias had been informed. They said she had. Maddox said he would give her a few more minutes. He waited. She didn't arrive. He rapped his cane on the door and again waved the marshals forward. He told them to tell Iglesias the building was surrounded and that no one would be allowed to enter or leave until Norma Harkness was turned over to Chief Lavelle and returned to jail. Iglesias sent a message by way of the marshal. It said that she would not be intimidated, nor would she respond to threats. For the rest of the day and halfway into the next day, the townspeople waited, periodically sitting and standing, determined to have justice for the violation of a young girl. And so it remained until one of the marshals approached the door. Mayor Maddox struggled to his feet. Everyone knew helping him angered him. He always said his struggles were his own to bear. Maddox limped to the door. A marshal opened the door and handed Maddox a sheet of paper. Maddox read the note. He stared at it, getting angrier with each passing second. Then he crushed it and threw it at the marshal. What he had expected would be a request to discuss the issue was not the subject of the note. It was a request to have food brought to them. The mayor's answer was clear. The mayor reiterated that no one and nothing would be leaving or coming in until Norma Harkness had first been turned over to the town's authorities. 15 minutes later, a marshal came with another note. Again, Maddox rose and went to the door. The marshal opened the door and handed Maddox the note. Maddox turned and walked to the crowd. He asked the council to meet with him. Stepping to the side, they held a discussion. Maddox returned to the front of the crowd. He told the group that Iglesias had demanded that they disperse immediately. She had called Washington, and they were going to send an armed force to disperse the crowd. He said that anyone who wanted to leave was welcome to do so. People looked around as if waiting for one person to rise to break the spell. No one did. Mrs. Sanderson could see the girl's intensity increase. She stopped. Then, with a suspenseful expression, she enticed them deeper. The community expected the federal government to live up to Iglesias' threat. The town expected arrival to be the next day. It didn't happen. That wasn't surprising. Getting everything ready would take time. The following day was still uneventful. As the people wearied, the council decided that most of the people would go home. The rest, volunteers, would attend in shifts. Several young men were posted on the roads into the town. When they sighted the government forces approaching, they were to raise the alarm and drive through the town, notifying the townspeople. Then many women and children would meet back in front of the community center. The third day, all was still quiet. Iglesias and her staff had become desperate. While they had water, they were starting the third day without food. At 6 p.m, Iglesias came to the door and pleaded for food. Maddox said they would get food when Miss Harkness was in Chief Lavelle's jail. Iglesias suggested that they negotiate and come to a compromise. She said there might be a solution where everyone gets what they need. Maddox was leery. After all, she was part of the federal government, and they could not be trusted. He also did not want any of the townspeople to get hurt or face legal trouble. So he took a chance. They walked to the church, sat on a pew, and searched for a solution. 20 minutes later, they had not returned. 30 minutes later, they had still not returned. 35 minutes later, the heavy, ornate door opened. With her cell phone pressed against her ear, Iglesias' pace away from the church was hurried. Her expression expressed panic. She rushed into the administration building. The door swung closed. It opened and Maddox limped toward the crowd. From the crowd came random questions. What had happened? Maddox said he wasn't sure, but her phone rang. She stood, listened for a few seconds, and walked toward the door and then left without another word to Maddox. A short time later, a group of marshals came to the door and stood. In their hands were assault rifles. Alexandra blurted out, "Why did you want to meet with Mayor Maddox?" Mrs. Sanderson looked at her and smiled as if a secret were being held back. A car, honking its horn to move the crowd away, pulled up in front of the community center. One of the young men who had been posted at the periphery of the community rushed over to Maddox. Panting, he told Maddox he had heard what sounded like several large trucks. At least 3, maybe more. Could even be 6 or 7. Holding on to the suspense, Mrs. Sanderson continued. Maddox wondered. Had the Fed sent a dozen, 2 dozen, 100 troops? Mayor Maddox didn't know, but he didn't want violence. The mayor asked how far away they were. The young man said it was hard to tell. Then the mayor told 2 men to find the location of the trucks and gather as much information as possible and report back. Mrs. Sanderson paused again, then stepped even closer. The girls leaned toward Mrs. Sanderson, straining to hear what happened next. She forcefully whispered. The men rushed to their cars, then suddenly stopped. A loud metallic rumbling drew their attention, and then the attention of the crowd to the main road into the town. Coming up from behind the crowd and spreading out were 8 covered military troop trucks and 2 armored assault vehicles. The trucks turned around and backed up to the crowd. 2 men exited the trucks' cabs and ran to the back of the trucks. Within less than half a minute, the flap flew back, the tailgate dropped. A few seconds later, over 200 troops poured out of the trucks and formed a phalanx across the back of the crowd. The class gasped, while the unarmed crowd, now numbering less than half of the original crowd size, still greatly outnumbered the troops. However, the troops were armed with high-powered weapons. But the rumbling of the trucks as they had driven through the neighborhoods toward the community center alerted the townspeople and rousted them from their sleep. "So the people came back?" Cynthia said. "Yes, they certainly did," and the crowd swelled. While the standoff continued, Mayor Maddox went to the community center door. Standing behind it with 2 of the marshals was Iglesias, glaring. Maddox pulled on the door. It was locked. She smirked. Elizabeth asked, why did she even bother going to the church to talk to Maddox? It was a trick. She was just delaying to give more time for the trucks to arrive. She wanted the crowd to think that an agreement was near, so some of the crowd would leave, and some did. The smaller the crowd, the easier it could be controlled. Anyway, Mayor Maddox pounded his cane on the door and yelled for Iglesias to talk to him. She moved up to the door. Before Maddox could say anything, she told him to tell the crowd to go home. If the area wasn't cleared in half an hour, the troops would begin clearing the crowd using whatever force was necessary. Maddox then had a dilemma. When he told the crowd what Iglesias had said, they became furious. It was clear that they were going to resist. Fearing what would come next, Maddox still asked the people to leave. But the uproar was so great that few people heard him. The back portion of the crowd surged toward the troops. The front surged toward Iglesias. Iglesias' phone went to her ear. Mrs. Sanderson suddenly stepped toward the girls. She pushed her palms toward the girls. The troops surged forward toward the crowd. The crowd stiffened, the people behind pushing against the people in front of them. People were pushed between the troops, separating the troops into smaller groups. The crowd surged, surrounding the smaller groups of troops. The troops panicked, those who could retreated to the trucks. The commander of the troops yelled for them to hold the line. Excited, several girls said, "Yeah, and get him." The class was on the verge of cheering. The jostling amongst the troops and crowd escalated. The crowd had backed up the retreating troops until they were flowing between the trucks. The smaller groups of troops were completely engulfed. The commander raised his pistol and fired into the air. Everyone halted, their eyes searching for the sound. Another shot came from inside one of the small groups. Then another shot rang out, then another and another. People scattered, running into each, trampling the unfortunate ones who fell. The girls were engulfed by fear and sorrow, each girl expressing her own feelings. Mrs. Sanderson stopped, turned to her desk, and leaned against the edge. She was silent for several seconds. 21 of the townspeople were dead, 15 were wounded. 2 children, one 10 and one 12, were among the dead. 22 troops were injured, 6 seriously. Darlene passionately broke in. They wouldn't dare attack us now. We have an army. My dad calls it standing army. Whatever that is. It's a permanent army. It's a full-time job. They protect us from intruders, persecutors, and the evil people who want to destroy Lord's bounty and holy bastion, God's blessed creations. Annie added, my dad's a captain in the army. That's very good, Annie. Make sure you tell him that we thank him for his service. Thank you for Annie's father came from numerous girls. Cynthia's hand slowly rose. What happened to the woman who assaulted the girl? Norma Harkness was released after a short investigation. And the government soldiers? Nothing. They were just following orders. And Iglesias? Due to the bad publicity, the federal authorities removed her from the town, along with her staff. Replacements were sent. They remained for 3 weeks, and they departed, leaving the town in the hands of the townspeople. Mayor Maddox was charged for instigating a riot, willful disobedience of a lawful order, misuse of federal funds, and several other misdemeanors. What happened to him? Due to the public reaction to the government's slaughter of unarmed innocent people, he received 6 months suspended sentence. Were any townspeople arrested? Yes. 24 were charged, but none faced trial. The government just wanted to bury the entire event. A year later, its impact on the public was not sufficient to maintain a place in the news cycle. 2 years later, few would recall the event. 5 years later, it had disappeared from the news. However, one Christian community would not let it be forgotten. For more than 75 years on October 25th, the Christian citizens of Landers Crossroads held services for the victims. Only when the United Christian States of America had been established was the event's history revived. We always wait to give the details until the young people are mature enough to hear it. Several hands shot toward the ceiling. I know you have a million questions, but they will have to wait. It's time to work on your projects. Annie, would you please go to the health office and check on Bethany? Being chosen, Annie proudly rose and left. Bethany and Naomi had already gone home.